Hey everybody, Paul James Caden here with the Spirits channel. In this video I just got done filming the Ghost Tube Vox session about the little man or Elmer, and I thought I would just put the camera on the tripod looking through the tree here at the headstones. It's very peaceful. You can see it's live, it's not a picture. And I thought I would do my next video here that I wanted to do rather than doing it in the house. And I wanted to talk about generational spirits, or spirits that follow us. They may be attached to our grandparents, they may be attached to our parents, they may be attached to our great-grandparents. You know, there's a lot of traditions, spiritual traditions, including Christianity, that, believed in these generational spirits that would attach themselves to a family almost like a curse and follow them until their power was broken and they were cast out, cast away. And when I was talking in the video about the devil, the Birdman, and the little man in your room, I made mention that this was something that my brother and I had talked about quite often. Even into adulthood, we would talk about what we called the devil dream, the devil experience. What was it? Why did this happen? Why did we both have this very similar experience? And I have a lot of stories to tell, encounters with the paranormal, some good, some not so good. And why did those things happen? I've often puzzled about it, as my brother has. And when I did the video, the devil, the Birdman, and the little man in your room, probably about 15 minutes after I was done with that video, it struck me, a thought just came to me. Generational spirits. And I never thought of this before. Even though I knew this information, I'd never thought of this before. That my grandfather, on his side of the family, they were very much into very dark witchcraft. I'm talking about putting curses on people, getting a lock of someone's hair and wrapping it up in a cloth with different herbs and spices and whatever the ingredients of the spell would be, and saying incantations over it and burning it in the fire to bring the person physical harm, disease, or injury. And he had an uncle, my grandfather, whose name was Enoch. And I want to save the story of Enoch for another day, because it's a story in and of itself. But basically, Enoch would have a seance every Saturday night where he allegedly spoke to the devil. And my grandfather said that, Uncle Enoch, his uncle, referred to Satan or the devil as the old boy. Every Saturday night he would sit and talk with the old boy. And the way Enoch died was, thinking about it right now, it still gives me goosebumps. My grandfather told this story many times, in his life. So there were some dark things that went on in my family, on that side of the family. My grandfather was a rugged guy. My grandparents were literally, you talk about hillbillies, hill people of the woods that lived in homemade shacks and lean-tos and cabins. And these people, they were rugged. But my grandfather, and he was a strong man in his 80s, pushing 80, he would give a young man today a run for his money, if not take him out. He was literally as strong as an ox. But because of some of the things he saw in his life as a result of the black magic, the spells, being at his Uncle Enoch's house one night when Uncle Enoch invited him, my grandfather and his brother, to sit down on one of his sessions and talk to the old boy, and what happened there, and again how Enoch died. I mean, he was really afraid of the spirit world, ghosts, magic, frogs, toads, which again is a story for another day all on its own. But because of the black magic that side of the family did, the family was literally riddled with paranormal activity. And it's interesting now that I'm standing here, doing paranormal activity and have an interest in it, but I come from it from a very different angle than they did. Time and study teaches us a lot. And even my father, he was plagued when he was a kid by something that would shake his bed, strange lights appearing in his room that would go around the baseboard of the floor and then just disappear. I mean, they saw all kinds of things. And then as I got older, and I've always been very sensitive to seeing spirits. I mean, I saw my first spirit when I was, before I was 3 o'clock, before I was 3 years old. But when I was 3, I saw one really clearly, and I still remember her from this day. It was on Christmas Eve when I was about 3 years old. And again, that's a story in and of itself that I would like to tell another time. But as I got older, and me and my brother would spend the night at our grandparents' house, being one sensitive to spirit, the history of my grandfather's family, that like my father when he was a kid, I too was plagued by something that would shake the bed, sometimes almost all night. And again, that's a story in and of itself. What I did one night to confront who or whatever was shaking the bed. And I don't think I ever experienced anything like that again. It was like something out of the Amityville Horror or The Exorcist. It was wild. And there was one particular bedroom in my grandparents' house that this happened in, and I never slept in that room again after that. I mean, and I had reason, that was really, really creepy. But a lot of things that happened to my grandfather, to my father, to my uncles, to my aunts, this paranormal activity that wasn't friendly, that wasn't nice. A lot of things that happened to them when they were younger happened to me. And then we have this whole incident with the devil and the Birdman in the room, and my brother having a similar, incident. And then we think of Uncle Enoch, who sat and talked to the devil, the old boy, every Saturday night. And from there I just kind of threaded the needle. And I knew all this information, but I never quite put it together in that way after I did that last video about the devil, the Birdman, and the little man in your room. It never dawned on me in such a way where I threaded that needle to say, oh my gosh, a lot of the same things that happened to them happened to me, and even, some of them happened to my brother. It's identical. And it really struck me at that moment. This is probably the result of generational spirits. These relatives who conjured the devil, did black magic, did all of these things, obviously brought something through that stuck with the family for a number of years. And the funny thing is, when I got old enough, and I went to live with my grandmother when I was 16. And boy, I'll tell you, those were years living with my grandmother. They were great, and I loved my grandparents. And for those who are wondering, no, my grandfather wasn't into any of that black magic or devil worship. It was him and my grandmother that first, talked to me and my brother about, God and Jesus, and taught us the Lord's Prayer and the "Now I lay me down to sleep" when we were kids. My grandfather would often talk about, his understanding. He wasn't a great reader, but where he learned the Bible stories about, the end of days and, that type of thing. Judgment Day, giving an account for what we did in our lives when we die and, stand before God. So he wasn't into all of that, and they were awesome grandparents. They really were. I mean, I would venture to say, like, the best. I loved my grandparents to this day. They had a big influence on my life. But those spirits that were around them, when I went to live with my grandmother at 16, I mean, spending the night with the shaking bed and all that was, that was one thing. But then going to live there, it was crazy. I saw some things that, I don't even know how I slept in the bed at night, and again, the shaking bed every night, every night, every night. About 5-10 minutes before I'd get in bed, or after I'd get in bed, I'd just lay there and the bed would start shaking, like somebody was at the foot of the bed shaking the bed. So these generational spirits. The funny thing is, when I was about 17, I would say 17 or 18. I mean, I believed in God. I was a Christian at that time, but I expressed interest in reading, the Bible more fully. And my mother gave me a Bible. It was I have to see if I can find a picture of this Bible online and post it in one of my videos. It was just called the Reach Out Bible, and it had big letters on the cover that said "Reach Out." And in the letters, it had like faces of people. It was a really cheesy, like early 1970s, 1980 cover design. It was one of these Bibles that was broken down into modern English, and she gave it to me, and I was living with my grandmother at the time. I took it and I read it every day. I had my first job, and I'd come home and I'd read few chapters every night. Started getting more close to God. And the funny thing is, when I started doing that, when I started having more of a serious relationship with God and finding more of what they call that joy of God, the joy of the Lord in my life, feeling really much closer to God, a lot of that paranormal activity just dropped. I didn't experience it anymore. It was gone. And I didn't know, I didn't know anything about generational curses or anything like that, but I did pray, that, God would bind those spirits, bind anything that was following me, because I felt like something was following me again, and that's a story for another day. Bind those things and drive them, from my life, from my home. And a lot of that really creepy, kooky stuff that followed the family for a number of years just ceased. It was done. I didn't have a problem with it anymore. Now I still saw things, because again, I'm sensitive to the spirit world, but nothing like it was back in those days. You know, there was some pretty crazy stuff, and like I said, I got a lot of stories to share um, in these videos. So generational curses, yeah, I believe they're real. I believe that they are real. I believe that there are spirits that can attach themselves to our family line and follow us through life. And they can manifest, you know, not only paranormal activity, but, you know, things like alcoholism, tempers, abuse, you know, and you see a lot of that with kind of like the paranormal very subtly sometimes in the background, you know, which again is stories for another day of people that I knew. So I would say, you know, if you're old or young and there were things in your family that you find have kind of like followed you, whether it's some kind of creepy spiritual paranormal activity that just weirds you out, a mindset, a temper, a bad habit, you know, you just feel like a darkness around you all the time, and you think back and say, gee, I'm just like my father, just like my mother, my grandfather was that way too. You might want to think about it. Maybe there is a generational spirit. And in the modern world today, we take these things for granted. You know, we all look at it, it's all a joke, it's all a myth, you know, the paranormal, the supernatural, or it's just a game we go out and play with our devices. You know, and I think we need to get back to some basics and think about these things now and then. So, from my experience, threading the needle of why this may have happened with the whole devil and the Birdman and other things that I'll share in other videos. You know, maybe there's somebody out there that will be inspired by my story and say, wow, yeah, maybe I have something like that. And there's different ways you can look up, you know, to break generational curses through prayer and, you know, binding those spirits and casting them, you know, from your life. But you have to be diligent. You have to be diligent, or they will try to come back if they see that the protection you're trying to put up is weak or feeble, or you're just, you know, not willing to put in change in your own life. You know, we have to be careful of that. But these things do exist. And if you find that there's something in your life that's kind of followed the generations, and you're just like your mother or your father, or have the same, you know, weird, creepy experiences as they did, maybe take that into consideration. Maybe somewhere along the line that you don't even know about, you know, somebody opened the door to, you know, some generational spirits that attach to the family line. So that's my video on generational spirits and curses. I hope you enjoyed the little conversation in the cemetery here, and I thank you for listening, and I'll see you again in the next video. Thanks again for watching, and God bless.